Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Saturday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information for your community or village by going to weather.gov/Alaska. That works fairly well on your mobile phone as well. You can always check out Marine VHF or the NOAA Weather Radio if that's easier. The info line is open at 800-472-0391 by phone, by Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. And during the afternoon, of course, if you can get to YouTube on your smartphone, you can download a very quick surface map briefing there if you'd like to check out what's going on around 4 o'clock or so in the afternoon. We'll kind of give you a sneak peek at what's to come for the rest of Alaska. Here's a look at some active weather across Alaska. For the last 24 hours or so, the focus has really been on southeastern Alaska, and now we're starting to see that shift over to more of the interior and southwest. It's a process, and right now we're still dealing with white pass and some of the wind chill effects in that region with blowing and drifting snow as well. It looks like the White Pass region may still be looking at about 7 to 8 inches of snow max, probably dealing with some stronger gusts, upwards of 50 miles per hour as well. So because of that, wind chill advisories are posted. Might have some poor visibility from time to time, but it's really going to be the wind chill that makes things the worst. So watch for at least a couple more inches of snow there as we go into the nighttime hours and into tomorrow. The winds will gradually subside, but for right now, it looks like wind chill values there could drop as cold as 50 below if you're traveling through the White Pass region. Let's shift our attention over a little bit more to South Central, and the interior will be next. Kodiak Island, the area shaded in red there, of course, will be dealing with blizzard potential there as we head into tonight and tomorrow. You'll start off with some scattered snow showers, but gradually that's going to ramp up as we head into tonight and into tomorrow. So as far as tonight goes, you could see about 2 to 5 inches of snow. By tomorrow, you're talking about another 2 to 4. So totals there, it's about 4 to 9 inches of snow on top of some pretty strong and gusty winds. You're looking at northerlies about 25 to 40 miles per hour through the larger part of the island. Shelikof Strait, those winds could be a little bit stronger, up to 55 miles per hour with some stronger gusts there. So if it's snowing and if it's blowing and all that lasts for several hours, that's a blizzard. And again, it's only going to reach blizzard potential there if there is snow actually falling from the sky, because it doesn't sound like you have a lot on the ground right now. So watch for snow to develop and increase in coverage tonight, and the winds will be coming up too. So plan on some rather poor conditions for your Sunday. Let's look a little bit further north first, and as you get into the interior, especially north of the Middle Tanana Valley, the Yukon Flats area, into the Brooks Range on either side, and also for the central Beaufort Seacoast, winter weather advisories are posted. You're still dealing with some light snow there, probably another inch or two of accumulation, but mostly, again, it's the winds that are blowing it around and causing poor visibility, not to mention those really nasty wind chills. It sounds like wind chill values could go as low as about 45 to maybe 50 below in most of those areas. The worst of the weather is still going to be on the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and boy, have you taken it on the chin for the last several weeks now. Another wave of stronger winds still moving through there through tonight and into tomorrow. Blizzard conditions are expected to continue as we head into noon on Sunday. To the west, the wintry weather and the winter weather advisories, especially east of Nuiqsut, will start to taper off as you go through your Sunday morning. Some of that as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. So from west to east, look for improvement tomorrow, but the blizzard warning stays up until noon on Sunday. A little bit further south, it's wind chills again. The wind moving through the upper Yukon and the upper Kuskokwim valleys there. in the Koyukuk Valley, still dealing with a lot of wind and cold, and with that, wind chill values could be as cold as 35 to 45 below. That also extends into southwestern Alaska. Not quite as cold, but you're talking about wind chill values again around 35 to 40 below in some cases, with the wind moving up to 20 to 30 miles per hour. So plan on just a bitter, cold day for Sunday, certainly tonight as well, but into Sunday, those wind chill advisories will continue for a large part of the interior and southwest Alaska. Let's look at the satellite picture across the Bering, and you can pick out fairly easily, I think, that northeasterly movement coming off the continent. This is cold and dry air, and as long as that air is moving at a decent clip, it is going to feel much colder than it is. Low pressure out across the North Pacific and across the western Bering Sea, still working its way around that very stable and cold dome of high pressure in the upper atmosphere. In fact, you can see the cold pushing back the moisture into eastern Siberia as that drier air is controlling many parts of the Bering Sea. As we look at the rest of Alaska, low pressure has worked its way out of southeast and is now working its way back toward south central Alaska and Kodiak Island. Some of the strongest winds will likely be from Yakutat and the northern Gulf all the way around to just outside of Prince William Sound and into the Barren Islands and Shelikof Strait. That's where those winds could be upwards of 40 to 50 miles per hour. And at times, again, there will be some waves of snow that start to pick up through the nighttime hours and tomorrow. With the wind and snow together, again, those are blizzard conditions there for Kodiak. As you look a little bit further into the interior, you don't see a whole lot of movement here. That's because that's a satellite picking up the very cold ground. There is some cloud cover hit and miss. Most of that is across the Arctic coast with another wave of low pressure moving from west to east across the Arctic coast. The winds have been stirred up. There is a little bit of snow with it, but by and large, it's just moving air that's making things miserable up across the Arctic coast, and a lot of that is being swept off the west coast and into the Bering Sea with very dry conditions. What you see out across the southern Bering and the Aleutians, mainly just scattered stratus and scattered snow showers. That trend should continue for the next several days. Here's the surface weather map, and you can see low pressure's kind of expanded a little bit more across the Gulf. You can see several waves of low pressure, these troughs marked in black lines, working their way around low pressure that turns counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and here in Alaska. And across southeastern Alaska, you can still see some snow falling across the region. Stronger winds still isolated to more areas of the Copper River Basin and southern Yukon. Still a pretty decent pressure gradient right there. And that is creating the wind across the north and western Gulf. We still have some light snow falling across the Alaska Peninsula. Dutch Harbor and Alaska reported snow a few hours ago. And snow and blowing snow, blizzard conditions there for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, with that blizzard warning up until noon tomorrow for places like Kaktovik. Tonight's forecast shows that trough of low pressure across the north still working its way eastward, just digging in to the high pressure dome that's got the interior so cold. We also have a wave of low pressure that's wrapping around the low pressure system in the north and western Gulf. As that happens, that is creating the wind and some of the gusts that we've seen across Wasilla and the Palmer area in the last 24 hours. The wind's still blowing there this morning. Things seem to be settling down this afternoon, but still a pretty active and windy situation, especially for those north and west of the Butte. Now, out across the Aleutians, scattered snow showers continue, as well as the Pribilofs and around St. Matthew. The ice edge is advancing. Looks like that's dropping south. We'll check on those conditions here in just a little bit. Rainfall across southeast tomorrow, mainly across extreme southern parts of southeast, so from Cake to maybe Craig and Klawock. A little bit further east and toward Hyder, you get into rain and snow, and probably around Hyder, that is snow. And then northward, it's still a chance for some light snow as we head through the next several days there around Juneau. In fact, Juneau is looking at totals that could be upwards of about 4 to 9 inches, I believe, by the time that's all said and done. So still looking like accumulating snow around the Juneau area through your Sunday, especially northern sections of southeast, and then it'll be Haines and Skagway as well. For most of south central, it's really going to be a dry period, except for coastal areas around Seward, Prince William Sound. You might see some snow showers from time to time. You get across the mountains there and into Homer, it'll be fairly close. The best chance for any snow will generally be south of Clam Gulch on the Kenai Peninsula. Meanwhile, just bitter cold if you're chasing the dogs or watching for the dogs out across the eastern interior along the Alcan. Conditions will continue to be breezy, and if you're in that wind, those wind chill values again, it could be around 35 to 40 below at its worst. Most areas are going to be a little more protected if you're down there in the lowlands. Now out across southwestern Alaska, scattered snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula will continue, as well as the Aleutians. Low pressure's up to 990 now by Sunday, and you can see it's quickly moving back to the west. But look what that does for the Gulf of Alaska and southeast. That starts to position more regions across south central, southwest, and southeast Alaska with more of a southerly flow. Now, not initially there for many in the southwest. You'd still be looking at that offshore wind or off-continent wind that's going to bring that colder air your way. But for many in Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island eventually, in south central and maybe southeast, you're starting to get into a somewhat milder flow coming up out of the North Pacific. So we'll see what that brings to us as we head into early next week. For right now, though, we are still under the effects of that cold high pressure system across the north and the winds that are pushing that across the south and western Alaska, as well as Nome. And you see clouds starting to advance a little bit more from the north and west. And lo and behold, here comes another zone of low pressure, a little trough there working across the Arctic coast. Once again, as that passes through, that'll likely stir up the wind. So we'll watch for more on that as we get into early next week. For southeast today, a really big tale about who had the wind, who had the snow, and well, the warm air that was still lingering across southern parts of southeast there. For Ketchikan and Annette, temps are still in the mid-30s this afternoon. Around Haines and Skagway, single digits. Juneau right there in the middle. Sitka was in the mid to upper teens. Prince William Sound also in the teens today, still breezy around Valdez. And 14 in Anchorage with 12 around Talkeetna. Looks like Eagle and Northway saw temps anywhere from 25 to about 35 below again. So folks chasing the dogs out there just really zipped up and holding on, trying to stay warm. Looks like 26 below in Fairbanks, 35 below Fort Yukon, 13 below around Kaktovik, 5 below for Barrow. As you get around the Chukchi Seacoast, temperatures not as bad as what you're seeing in that wind out across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Kotzebue Sound temperatures from 5 to 10 below, 1 above in Nome today. Unalakleet was 4 below. Looks like Galena was showing 8 below, McGrath 5 below, Tanana was 17 below, a little bit further toward the interior. Grayling and many across the lower Kuskokwim Valley, we're seeing temps anywhere from 5 to 10 below. Bethel was 1 below, not counting the wind chill. Dillingham and King Salmon showing temps just above 0 again, but wind chill advisories are posted for your area tonight. Teens and 20s for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point saw some snow this afternoon, 23 degrees by 3 o'clock. Teens for the Pribilofs and 30s for the central and western chain, 26 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Overnight low temperatures are going to be miserable again in the interior. Look for readings between anywhere 40 to as cold as 56 below in Eagle and Northway. Once again, if you are out there working any of the dog races, be extra careful and stay out of the wind. Anywhere from 25 to 30 below for the Arctic coast. Kotzebue Sound temperatures anywhere from 15 to 25 below. Norton Sound temps 5 to 15 below. Nome looking at 9 below tonight. Bristol Bay 10 to 15 below. Kodiak Island 26 with wind and snow and potential for blizzard conditions, 20s and 30s for the Aleutians, and 13 in St. Paul with a high of 17 there tomorrow. For your Sunday in Fairbanks, 15 below. Eagle looking at temps at 30 below tomorrow. The Arctic coast 15 to 30 below. The upper Koyukuk Valley, probably 5 to 15 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures 5 to 10 below. Nome only 3. The Aleutians will be in the lower 30s there, a few spots above freezing. The Alaska Peninsula, teens and 20s. Kodiak 32 and 20s and 30s for most of southeast. A few places like Craig and Klawock, Ketchikan, maybe lower 40s in the afternoon. IFR conditions are expected for the north and eastern Gulf, as well as areas around Kodiak Island, of course, with snow and blowing snow. That's going to be a problem. Watch for patchy IFR up around the upper Yukon Valley as well. NVFR with some improvement for the Arctic coast, and watch for patchy IFR on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow. Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass are both looking at improvements throughout the day, heading for VFR. The Alaska Range, generally VFR conditions all the way around the Horn for Windy Pass. VFR, Isabel Pass, expecting VFR. Mentasta Pass should be A-OK. Tanita Pass, breezy, but VFR, it looks like a little bit of chop and probably some snow showers developing throughout the afternoon around Portage Pass. Most of that, though, might be a lot closer to the coastal areas, so you might be okay there as we go through Portage tomorrow. Chilkoot and White Pass, we're going to be watching snow develop there all day long, so plan on IFR, if not by the morning, certainly by the end of the day. Surface freezing line really isn't changed much. It's still hovering right over southeastern Alaska. A big drop over the Alaska Peninsula with a cold air moving off the continent. 2,000-foot freezing lines trying to sneak northward across the Dixon entrance. Icing potential is going to be there and pretty close to Kodiak Island as well. Below 8,000 feet, but above 2,000 feet. And then below 9,000 feet for the north and eastern sections of southeastern Alaska. Light to isolated moderate generally. Elsewhere, it's just too dry. A jet stream of broad westerly flow sweeping across the Arctic coast. You can see the main storm track is well south across the Pacific there. And then we have several waves of low pressure across the north and western Gulf with stronger southwesterlies blowing into southeastern Alaska. and high pressure is still controlling the bearing. As long as that's there, it is going to be cold for most of us in Alaska. North and easterly winds at 9,000 feet, zipping across from 30 to as high as 50 knots across the YK. Low pressure sitting just south of Kodiak Island, giving us that southwesterly motion there and dragging that surface storm back to the west. Southeasterlies across Juneau and Minion southeast, around 10 to 25 knots there, and a light westerly flow coming off the Brooks Range. Much faster winds, though, across the western Alaska Range and southwest. Look for northeasterlies coming out of the Yukon Valley, 40 to 50 knots. That continues to speed up as it heads toward the central chain. Southerlies moving across the Gulf, 20 to 40 knots, and northwesterlies coming into the Arctic coast as high as 50 knots around Barrow and the western Brooks Range. Turbulence potential then, there's a lot of it, but it's moving out of southeast. It's moving toward the northern Gulf, Kodiak Island, generally below 4,000 feet. Look for a broad area of at least some isolated moderate there, maybe occasional moderate from the lower and middle Yukon Valley southwest to the Kuskokwim Valley, from many out across the YK below 4,000 feet. We're going to watch the turbulence improve across the Arctic coast and continue for the central chain as we head through your Sunday. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a peek at the ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Her name is Patty Wagstaff, one of the most celebrated aerobatic pilots of all time. Three-time U.S. National Aerobatic Champion, she is the first woman to win this title. Because of her achievements, Patty has been honored by the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum as a pioneer of flight, and her Goodrich Extra 260 aircraft occupies the same gallery at the Smithsonian as Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Vega.
I have to admit, what I do seems like a pretty dangerous way to make a living. I suppose that's part of the appeal, why so many people come out to see me fly and to see me take these risks. But as fellow pilots, I'll let you in on a little secret. There's risk, all right. As you know, anytime you climb into an aircraft, there's risk. But over the years, I've learned to minimize that risk by careful preparation, training, planning, common sense, and constant situational awareness. Attention to safety keeps me alive in the air. But safety doesn't begin at the top of an inverted loop. Safety begins on the ground before you get in your airplane.
As pilots, most of us have seen a great deal of change in airport operations over the past few years. Today, there are nearly 70 million tower operations annually, and the number is growing each year. Pilots are challenged with more and more complex air traffic procedures, more complicated airport layout design. More and more, it is an environment of very real risk. But just as Patty Wagstaff has developed strategies for mitigating risk in the air, pilots can do the same on the ground by following standard procedures, such as using airport diagrams and planning their taxi routes.
The great majority of runway incursions are caused by pilot error. And the great majority of those errors, more than 70%, are caused by general aviation pilots. Those of us who have been flying for a while remember that they didn't teach us much about runway safety back in the days when we were in training. In recent years, that's changed. The FAA has developed a number of educational programs and strategies to help pilots improve runway safety. In fact, with more than 650,000 pilots and more than 240,000 aircraft all conducting millions of operations around the clock, it's amazing how safe our airports are. But still, with the best of training, collisions can happen at any airport, at any time, to any pilot. We may be good pilots, but we are also human. And sometimes we make very human mistakes.
And ground Cessna 93040. Say again.
Runway incursions are most often the result of a loss of situational awareness. For a variety of reasons, the pilot becomes confused by the airport's signs and layout, or doesn't listen to or understand the controller's instructions, or simply fails to follow instructions.
Cessna 3 Sierra Papa.
Hold short, runway 26 left.
453 Sierra Papa, hold short, runway 26 left.
Cessna 3 Sierra Papa, you're over the whole line.
Often this is because he or she is unfamiliar with the airport, the pilot's fatigued, or is distracted by something in the cockpit.
You know what I was doing last night?
For a few critical seconds, pilots lose track of where they are in relation to their surroundings.
You can imagine how important it is for me to focus on situational awareness. In the air, my life depends on it. If I don't know precisely where I am and where I'm going, and the tasks required to get me there, the consequences could be catastrophic. And the same goes for you and for me on the ground.
One of the first keys to situational awareness is attention to detail even before you start your engine. Just as we always study area charts and weather information before we fly, it's important to be thoroughly familiar with the airport's layout before we taxi. Every airport is different, so it's important to obtain and study airport diagrams. Pay particular attention to complex or confusing runway and taxiway intersections and runway thresholds. Some airports publish hotspots on their airport diagrams, for example, intersections, where pilots should be especially vigilant. Obviously, we should make a similar study of the airport at our destination. Once you are thoroughly familiar with the airport layout, make sure you review the signs you will encounter as you taxi toward the active runway. Some simple phrases can help you remember what the signs mean. Black square, you're there. These black signs tell you which runway or taxiway you're on right now. Yellow array points the way. These yellow signs with black arrows point you toward a runway or a taxiway, or toward a destination, such as a ramp. If you see white numerals on a red sign, remember, red and white, runways in sight. This type of sign shows the hold position for the runway. Remember, yellow markings represent taxiways, and white markings represent runways.
And the ice is not quite running away, but it is on the move with northeasterlies. It looks like it's moving about 1 kilometer a day or so, as far as I know. And northeasterly flow is pushing this toward St. Paul. And it looks like now, with the revised forecast, the sea ice edge might reach St. Paul. So plan on some changes there, where we previously were discussing that the ice might not make it to the Pribilofs. That is now not the expectation anymore. We're also looking at ice across northern Cook Inlet, and with the cold continuing there, more ice is expected across the Bering Sea. So you can track this anytime you want. weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at southeast forecast. Now, as far as wind goes, still looking for improvements, but it's still a windy day tomorrow across the Lynn Canal. Northerlies at 40 knots. Looks like 30 knots there in the central parts of southeast. Southeast through the Clarence Channel, looking at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southerlies south of Sitka at 20 knots, and offshore winds there south of Yakutat at 35 knots. 12 to 14-foot seas are expected there. Monday, the winds go light and a little more variable up and down the coast. Most areas 10 knots there. We're still looking at southerlies at 20 knots coming into Yakutat and the northern Gulf. Northerlies out of Lynn Canal still holding around 20 knots, but a big improvement over what we're talking about tomorrow. And southeasterlies 15 to 20 knots there across the central and southern parts. Clarence Strait looking at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. South central will start to pick up the wind. North and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, the strongest of which west of the Barrens and in the Shelikof Strait up to storm force there. The western Gulf 35 to 40 knot winds. Look for 11 to 13-foot seas there. Again, freezing spray is going to be an issue as well in some of those stronger wind areas. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 7-foot sea, diminished by Monday down to 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Easterlies into the western Gulf 15 to 20 knots there. Northeasterlies on either side of Kodiak Island with improving wind conditions there. Northeasterlies across Cook Inlet and down to west of the Barrens, where winds come down significantly by Monday. 15 to 25 knots up and down Cook Inlet. and into the Shelikof Strait region, 30 knots there with a 10-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots all areas, with ice inside of Bristol Bay, 11-foot seas north of Cold Bay, and 7 to 10-foot seas there in the Pacific. As we get into Monday, a little bit of a shift to the north and east, 25 to as high as 40 knots there on the Pacific side. 15-foot seas are expected there for Monday. Across the Aleutians, north and easterly winds will continue. It looks like due east out around Kiska to Attu. 25-knot wind there south of Unalaska and Nikolsky, 30 knots. South of the central chain, you're looking at 12-foot seas on the Pacific side. 13 to 14-foot seas come up even more on Monday to 15 to 17 feet on the Bering side. And north and easterly winds will continue to be the dominant direction, with northerlies, though, around Kiska with a 16-foot sea on a 30-knot wind. For the west coast, ice is starting to fill in a little bit more, as we just said, 25 to 35 knots there in the north. 30 knots with a northeasterly flow around the Pribilofs, with a freezing spray issue there all the way south of the ice edge. Northerlies around St. Paul and St. George at 35 knots with a 14-foot sea. Diminishing winds just a little bit on Monday. Northeasterlies 20 to 25 knots in the north, 25 to 30 knots in the south, and 4-foot seas closer to the coast and the ice edge, 14 feet probably around the Pribilofs there as we get into Monday afternoon. Now for the Arctic coast, look for a northerly flow due into Barrow there at 15 knots. North and westerly winds much stronger, though, across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. That means winds will stay up and they will continue to push the snow around, so watch for poor visibility there. Blizzard warning still in effect now. Northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi Sea coast up to 25 knots inside of Kotzebue Sound, down to 15 knots for Monday, and winds become a little more southerly up the northern Chukchi Sea coast, southwesterly around Point Barrow at 15 knots, and more of a westerly flow, but diminishing there for the Beaufort Sea coast as we head into Monday. Recapping tonight's weather, the heaviest winter weather is starting to shift westward. Blizzard warnings are up for Kodiak Island. Look for snow to accumulate as we head into tonight and tomorrow. Many areas could see a good 4 to 8 inches of snow or more, with blowing and drifting snow continuing through your Sunday. So plan on some poor visibility and poor travel conditions. Winter weather advisories for the Brooks Range and blizzard warnings for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Wind chill advisories elsewhere for...
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.